Marcus Rodriguez stepped off the military transport bus, his heavy duffel bag slung over his shoulder. After 18 months overseas, the familiar streets of his hometown looked different somehow. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the quiet neighborhood as he walked the final 3 blocks to his house. His heart raced with excitement thinking about seeing his 2 German shepherds, Rex and Luna, who had been staying with his elderly neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, while he was deployed. As he approached his modest 2-story home, something felt wrong. The yard looked overgrown, and several newspapers lay scattered on the front porch. Mrs. Patterson had promised to keep an eye on the property, but it appeared neglected. Marcus quickened his pace, fishing for his keys in his cargo pocket. He had called Mrs. Patterson from the base yesterday to let her know he was coming home, but she hadn't answered. He assumed she was probably just out running errands. The front door creaked as he pushed it open, and immediately he noticed the musty smell of a house that had been closed up too long. "Rex, Luna," he called out, expecting to hear the thundering paws of his beloved dogs racing to greet him. Instead, he was met with an eerie silence that made his skin crawl. His military training kicked in, and he instinctively became alert to his surroundings. Moving through the living room, Marcus noticed that everything seemed to be in its proper place. But there was a thin layer of dust covering the furniture. His mail was stacked neatly on the coffee table, clearly placed there by Mrs. Patterson during her visits. But where were his dogs? He called their names again, louder this time, his voice echoing through the empty house. Then he heard it, a faint whimpering coming from upstairs. Marcus dropped his duffel bag and took the stairs 2 at a time. The sound was coming from his bedroom at the end of the hall. As he approached the closed door, the whimpering became more distinct and he could hear what sounded like scratching against wood. Marcus slowly turned the doorknob and opened the door. Rex and Luna were huddled together in the far corner of the room, visibly trembling. Their food and water bowls were in the room, recently filled, but both dogs looked thinner than he remembered. When they saw him, they didn't run to greet him as they normally would. Instead, they cowered further into the corner, their eyes wide with fear. "Hey boys, it's me," Marcus said softly, crouching down and extending his hand. Luna, usually the braver of the 2, took a tentative step forward but stopped when a loud creaking sound came from somewhere in the house below. Both dogs immediately pressed themselves against the wall again, shaking uncontrollably. Marcus had seen fear before. In combat zones, in fellow soldiers, in civilians caught in dangerous situations. But he had never seen his confident, well-trained dogs display this level of terror. These were the same dogs that had protected his home for years, that had never been afraid of thunderstorms or fireworks. Something had frightened them so badly that they were afraid to leave this room. He noticed scratch marks on the bedroom door, as if the dogs had been desperately trying to get out, or perhaps trying to keep something from getting in. The wooden floor near the door was worn down from what appeared to be constant pacing. It was clear that Rex and Luna had been trapped in this room for some time, and whatever had scared them was still in the house. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to piece together what could have happened. Mrs. Patterson was in her 70s, but had always been reliable. She loved Rex and Luna almost as much as he did. She would never have left them locked in a room unless something was seriously wrong. As he gently coaxed his dogs closer, offering them comfort and reassurance, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone in the house. The late afternoon light streaming through the bedroom window was beginning to fade, casting strange shadows across the walls. Marcus realized he needed to investigate the rest of the house to understand what had terrorized his dogs. But first he wanted to get Rex and Luna somewhere safe. Whatever was lurking in his home had been there long enough to traumatize his animals, and he wasn't going to take any chances with their safety. As he prepared to lead his dogs out of the room, another sound echoed from somewhere below, a soft thud, like something heavy being moved across the floor. Rex and Luna immediately pressed against his legs, seeking protection from their returning master. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized that whatever had been living in his house while he was away was still there, and it didn't seem interested in leaving. Marcus carefully led Rex and Luna out of the bedroom, keeping them close to his side. The dogs pressed against his legs with every step, their ears pinned back and tails tucked low. As they reached the top of the stairs, Marcus paused to listen. The house had returned to its unsettling silence, but he could feel a presence somewhere below. His military training told him to secure the area methodically, but his concern for his dogs made him want to get them out of the house first. He decided to take them to his truck parked in the driveway, where they would be safe while he investigated. As they descended the stairs, every creak of the old wooden steps seemed amplified in the quiet house. When they reached the living room, Luna suddenly stopped and let out a low growl, staring toward the kitchen. Marcus followed her gaze but couldn't see anything unusual from where he stood. Rex joined in with a barely audible whine, both dogs refusing to move any closer to the kitchen area. Marcus made a mental note of their reaction and gently guided them toward the front door. Once outside, Marcus opened his truck and helped both dogs into the back seat. They seemed slightly calmer in the open air, but their eyes remained fixed on the house. He gave them each a treat from an old package he found in his glove compartment and spoke to them in soothing tones. "I'm going to figure out what's going on, okay, boys? You stay here where it's safe." Walking back toward the house, Marcus noticed that Mrs. Patterson's curtains were drawn across the street. Her car was in the driveway, but something about her house looked different too. He made another mental note to check on her after he dealt with whatever was in his own home. Right now, his priority was understanding what had turned his fearless German shepherds into trembling shadows of their former selves. Marcus entered his house again, this time more cautiously. He moved through the living room toward the kitchen, where his dogs had shown the strongest fear response. The kitchen appeared normal at first glance, clean dishes in the sink, a few items on the counter. But as he looked more carefully, he noticed things that seemed out of place. The refrigerator door had several scratches near the handle, as if someone had been clawing at it. Some of his canned goods were scattered on the floor near the pantry, and one of his kitchen chairs was overturned. Most disturbing was a dark stain on the linoleum floor near the back door that he didn't remember being there before he left for deployment. Marcus knelt down to examine the stain more closely. It looked old, maybe a few weeks, and had a reddish-brown color that made his stomach turn. He noticed that the back door which led to his basement was slightly ajar. He always kept that door locked, and Mrs. Patterson knew never to go down there because the basement stairs were old and dangerous. Standing slowly, Marcus approached the basement door. A musty, unpleasant smell wafted up from the darkness below. It was different from the stale air smell he had noticed earlier. This was something organic, something that made him think of the field hospitals he had worked in overseas. He reached for the light switch, but when he flipped it, nothing happened. The basement remained pitch black. Marcus retrieved a flashlight from his kitchen drawer and returned to the basement door. As he shined the light down the wooden steps, he could see that several of the boards were broken, as if someone or something heavy had fallen through them. The smell was stronger now, and he had to breathe through his mouth to keep from gagging. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text message from an unknown number. Marcus pulled it out and read, "Welcome home, soldier. Some things are better left undisturbed." The message sent a chill through him. How did anyone know he was home? He had only been back for less than an hour, and he hadn't told anyone except Mrs. Patterson. Looking back toward his truck, he could see Rex and Luna watching him through the rear window. Their expressions still filled with anxiety. They had been trying to warn him about something, and now he was beginning to understand that whatever was in his basement was far more serious than a simple break-in or vandalism. Marcus decided he needed backup before investigating the basement further. The text message suggested that someone was watching him, and his dog's extreme fear indicated a threat that went beyond anything he had imagined. He stepped back from the basement door and reached for his phone to call the police. But before he could dial, he heard Mrs. Patterson's voice calling his name from her front yard across the street. She was waving at him frantically, and even from a distance he could see that she looked upset and frightened. Whatever had been happening in his house, Mrs. Patterson clearly knew more about it than she had let on in their previous conversations. Marcus closed his front door and walked across the street to Mrs. Patterson's house, keeping his phone ready in case he needed to call for help. The elderly woman was standing on her porch in her bathrobe and slippers, her gray hair disheveled and her hands shaking. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Marcus, thank God you're home," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "I've been so worried. I didn't know what to do. I was too scared to call the police because I wasn't sure they would believe me." She glanced nervously toward his house and then back at him. "How are Rex and Luna? Are they okay?" I did my best to take care of them, but I was afraid to go inside your house for the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks? Marcus asked, confused. Mrs. Patterson, what happened? Why were my dogs locked in my bedroom? And what's in my basement? He kept his voice gentle, knowing that the old woman was clearly distressed, but he needed answers quickly. Mrs. Patterson invited him inside her house and led him to her kitchen table. She poured 2 cups of coffee with trembling hands before sitting down across from him. It started about a month ago, she began, looking out her window toward his house. I heard strange noises coming from your place late at night. At first I thought maybe someone was trying to break in, so I started watching more carefully. She took a sip of her coffee and continued. I saw a man going in and out of your house through the back door. He had keys, Marcus. He acted like he belonged there. I thought maybe you had asked someone to house sit while you were away, but Rex and Luna were barking constantly and they sounded distressed, not just alert. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. What did this man look like? Did you recognize him? He was trying to stay calm, but the thought of a stranger living in his house and terrorizing his dogs made his blood boil. He was tall, maybe in his 40s, with dark hair and a beard. He always wore the same green military jacket, which is why I thought you might know him. He carried a large duffel bag sometimes, and he seemed to know his way around your house very well. Mrs. Patterson paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. Marcus, I think he was living there. I saw lights on at all hours, and sometimes I could smell cooking food. The revelation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Someone had been living in his house for weeks with keys, acting like they owned the place. Mrs. Patterson, did you ever try to talk to him? Did you call anyone? The old woman shook her head sadly. I was too frightened. He looked dangerous, and I'm an old lady living alone. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. The dog stopped barking. There was a terrible smell coming from your house, and I saw him leave in the middle of the night, carrying what looked like heavy garbage bags. Marcus felt sick as he processed this information. You think something happened in my basement? I don't know for sure, but after that night I only went to your house during the day to feed Rex and Luna. I found them locked in your bedroom, and they wouldn't come out. They seemed terrified of the rest of the house. I've been putting their food and water in the bedroom and leaving as quickly as possible. Mrs. Patterson reached across the table and grabbed Marcus's hand. There's something else. Yesterday, after you called to say you were coming home, I saw that man again. He was watching your house from a car parked down the street. When he saw me looking, he drove away, but I got the feeling he was waiting for something. Marcus realized that the anonymous text message he had received made more sense now. This person had been monitoring his house and knew about his return. Mrs. Patterson, I need you to call the police right now. Tell them everything you just told me. I'm going back to my house to wait for them, but I want you to stay here and keep your doors locked. As he stood to leave, Mrs. Patterson grabbed his arm. Marcus, be careful. There was something about that man that wasn't right. The way he moved, the way he looked at your house like he owned it. And the smell, she shuddered. I think something very bad happened in your basement, and I don't think he's finished with whatever he was doing there. Marcus walked back across the street, his mind racing with possibilities, none of them good. His dogs were still watching from his truck, and he could see that they became more agitated as he approached his house. He needed to secure the scene and wait for the police, but every instinct he had developed during his military service was telling him that he was walking into a dangerous situation. As he reached his front porch, Marcus noticed something he had missed earlier. There were muddy footprints leading from his driveway to his front door, and they were fresh. Someone had been at his house very recently, possibly while he was talking to Mrs. Patterson. The realization that he might not be alone sent adrenaline coursing through his system. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed 911. But before he could complete the call, he heard his back door slam shut. Someone was definitely inside his house right now, and they weren't trying to hide their presence anymore. He had to make a choice. Wait for the police and risk letting whoever was inside escape, or confront the intruder himself and risk walking into a trap. Marcus quickly completed his 911 call, speaking in low, urgent tones to the dispatcher. This is Marcus Rodriguez at 428 Pine Street. I have an intruder in my house, and I believe there may be evidence of a serious crime in my basement. I'm a returning Marine, and I'm going to secure the premises until officers arrive. The dispatcher tried to convince him to wait outside, but Marcus had already made his decision. He moved around to the back of his house, staying low and using the bushes for cover. His military training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, secure the perimeter, protect innocent lives. Through the back window, he could see a shadow moving in his kitchen. The intruder was no longer trying to be quiet, which suggested either desperation or confidence that he wouldn't be caught. Marcus tested the back door and found it unlocked. He could hear heavy footsteps moving through his house, heading toward the front. It sounded like someone was carrying something substantial. Taking a deep breath, Marcus entered through the back door, moving silently through his kitchen toward the sounds of movement. As he reached the living room, he saw a man matching Mrs. Patterson's description stuffing items into a large military duffel bag. The stranger was tall and bearded, wearing the same green military jacket she had mentioned. But what shocked Marcus most was that he recognized some of the items being stolen. They were his own military medals and personal effects from his deployment. "Stop right there," Marcus called out, positioning himself between the intruder and the front door. The man spun around, and Marcus could see that his eyes had a wild, unstable look. This wasn't just a thief. There was something seriously wrong with this person. "Well, well," the man said, his voice carrying a strange mix of familiarity and hostility. "The real hero comes home at last. I've been keeping your house warm for you, Rodriguez." He spoke Marcus's name like he knew him personally, which sent a chill down Marcus's spine. "Who are you? How do you know my name?" Marcus demanded, keeping his distance but ready to react if the man made any sudden moves. In the background, he could hear sirens approaching, but they were still several minutes away. The intruder laughed bitterly. "You don't remember me, do you? Staff Sergeant Tom Hendricks, 2nd Battalion. We served together in Afghanistan, Marcus. I was in the convoy that got hit by that IED outside Kandahar. You remember that day, don't you? The day you became a hero while the rest of us got forgotten." Marcus's memory flashed back to that terrible day 18 months ago. The explosion, the chaos, the desperate attempts to save his fellow soldiers. He did remember Tom Hendricks, but barely. Tom had been evacuated with serious injuries, and Marcus had never seen him again after that day. "Tom, I remember. You were hurt badly. How did you find my house? What are you doing here?" Marcus tried to keep his voice calm, but he could see that Tom was deeply unstable. The man's hands were shaking, and there were fresh scratches on his arms and face. "What am I doing here?" Tom's voice rose to a shout. "I'm taking what should have been mine. You got the medals, the recognition, the hero's welcome home. What did I get? A medical discharge and a brain injury that makes it impossible to hold a job. So I decided to live your life for a while, see what it felt like to be the golden boy." Marcus realized that Tom had been living in his house not just for shelter, but as some kind of twisted attempt to steal his identity in life. "Tom, you need help. Let me call someone who can get you the support you need. This isn't the way to handle what happened to us over there." But Tom was beyond reasoning. "Support? I've been living in your basement for 2 months, Marcus. Do you want to know what's down there? Do you want to see what happens when the hero's life doesn't turn out to be so perfect after all?" The sirens were getting closer, and Marcus could see panic starting to set in Tom's eyes. "Tom, the police are almost here. Don't make this worse than it already is. Let's walk outside together and figure this out." Instead of complying, Tom reached into his jacket and pulled out a knife. "You're going to see the basement, Marcus. You're going to see what your perfect life really looks like when someone else is living it. You're going to understand what it feels like to lose everything." Marcus assessed his options quickly. Tom was armed and clearly unstable, but he was also injured and malnourished from living in harsh conditions. The knife was a serious threat, but Marcus had dealt with worse situations in combat. The key was to keep Tom talking until the police arrived, while staying ready to defend himself if necessary. "Okay, Tom, show me the basement. But put the knife down first. We're both Marines. We can handle this like soldiers, not like criminals." Marcus hoped that appealing to their shared military background might reach whatever was left of the man Tom used to be. Tom seemed to consider this for a moment, but then his expression hardened again. "Nice try, hero, but I'm done taking orders. You're going to see what I've been working on down there, and then you're going to understand that your perfect homecoming isn't going to be so perfect after all." As Tom motioned toward the basement, tucked with his knife, Marcus realized that whatever was waiting in his basement was much worse than he had imagined. The smell, the stains, Tom's deteriorating mental state. Everything pointed to a situation that had spiraled completely out of control during the months he had been away. Marcus moved slowly toward the basement door, his hands raised to show he wasn't a threat while keeping his eyes on Tom's knife. The sirens were much closer now, probably less than 2 minutes away. He just needed to keep Tom talking and avoid escalating the situation until help arrived. "Tom, whatever's down there, we can work through it together. We're both Marines who served our country. We both went through hell in Afghanistan. You don't have to do this alone." Marcus spoke in the calm, steady voice he had used to comfort wounded soldiers in the field. Tom's hand trembled as he held the knife, and Marcus could see tears beginning to form in his eyes. "You don't understand, Marcus. After that IED, everything changed. The brain injury, the nightmares, the way people looked at me when I came home. I lost my job, my apartment, my girlfriend. I had nothing left except the news stories about the heroic Marine who saved his squad." As they reached the basement door, the smell that had been bothering Marcus earlier became overwhelming. It was the unmistakable odor of decay and human waste, mixed with something else that made his stomach turn. Tom noticed his reaction and laughed bitterly. "That's right, hero. Take a good smell of your perfect homecoming. I've been living like an animal down there because I had nowhere else to go. No family to welcome me home. No comfortable house waiting for me. Just the streets and whatever shelter I could find." Marcus began to understand the full scope of what had happened. Tom hadn't just been squatting in his house. He had been living in the basement in deplorable conditions, probably for months before Mrs. Patterson had even noticed him. The mental image of a fellow Marine reduced to such circumstances filled Marcus with both sympathy and horror. "Tom, listen to me. You're not alone anymore. I'm here now and we can get you the help you need. The VA has programs for brain injuries, for PTSD, for housing assistance. You don't have to live like this." Marcus could hear car doors slamming outside as the police arrived, but Tom was shaking his head violently. "It's too late for that now, Marcus. Do you want to know what else is down there? Do you want to see what happens when a Marine falls through the cracks and society forgets about him?" Tom's voice was becoming more erratic, and Marcus realized that the man was having some kind of breakdown. Before Marcus could respond, he heard heavy footsteps on his front porch and authoritative voices calling out, "Police, we're entering the premises." Tom's eyes went wide with panic and he grabbed Marcus's arm with his free hand. "They can't take me back to the streets, Marcus. I won't survive out there again. You have to see what I've done. You have to understand what your hero story cost me." Tom was pulling him toward the basement stairs, but Marcus could see that several of the wooden steps were broken and dangerous. "Officers were in the kitchen," Marcus called out, hoping to let the police know exactly where they were. He could hear them moving through his house, their radios crackling with updates. Tom's grip on his arm tightened, and the knife moved closer to Marcus's chest. "Tom, the police are here now. They can help us both. Put the knife down and let's walk upstairs together. No one has to get hurt here." Marcus kept his voice steady, but he could see that Tom was beyond rational thought now. The basement door swung open wider, and the smell became so strong that Marcus had to fight not to gag. In the dim light from the kitchen, he could see that the basement stairs were not just broken, they had been deliberately torn apart. Whatever Tom had been doing down there, he had been trapped in the basement for some time. "You want to know what your perfect life really looks like?" Tom whispered, his voice now barely audible. "I found something down there, Marcus. Something that was already there when I moved in. Something that makes my problems seem very small." Just then, 2 police officers appeared in the kitchen doorway, their weapons drawn but not aimed. "Drop the knife and step away from the civilian," one of them commanded. Tom spun around to face them, and Marcus could see that the man was completely overwhelmed by the situation. "Tom, do what they say. Everything's going to be okay," Marcus said. But he could feel that Tom was about to make a desperate decision. The combination of mental illness, trauma, and panic was pushing him toward a breaking point that could end badly for everyone involved. Tom looked at Marcus, then at the police officers, then down at the basement. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said quietly. "I just wanted to understand what it felt like to be the hero instead of the forgotten casualty. But what I found down there, Marcus, your house has been hiding secrets long before I ever arrived." As Tom spoke these words, Marcus realized that whatever was in his basement wasn't just evidence of Tom's deteriorating mental state. There was something else down there. Something that predated Tom's arrival. Something that had been waiting in the darkness of his home while he was serving overseas. The thought filled him with a new kind of dread that had nothing to do with the immediate threat Tom posed. The standoff in Marcus's kitchen stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Tom held the knife with shaking hands while the two police officers maintained their position in the doorway. Marcus stood between them, trying to serve as a bridge between a desperate man who needed help and officers who were just trying to do their jobs safely. "Tom, I believe you," Marcus said, his voice carrying the authority he had learned as a squad leader. "If there's something in my basement that was there before you arrived, then we need to investigate it properly. But first, you need to put that knife down so nobody gets hurt." One of the officers, a veteran cop with graying hair, seemed to recognize the delicate nature of the situation. "Sir, we're here to help both of you. If there's evidence of a crime on this property, we'll investigate it thoroughly, but we need everyone to stay calm and safe." Tom looked around the room wildly, his eyes darting between Marcus, the officers, and the basement door. "You don't understand. I've been living down there for months. I know every inch of that basement now. There are things hidden behind the walls, things that smell like death, things that your neighbor probably doesn't know about." Marcus felt his blood run cold. He had bought this house from an elderly man who had died shortly after the sale. The previous owner had lived alone for decades, and Marcus had never bothered to thoroughly explore the basement beyond checking the basic utilities. Now he was beginning to wonder what secrets might have been buried in his home's history. "Tom, tell me exactly what you found," Marcus said, ignoring the officer's attempts to get him to step away from the armed man. "If someone was hiding something in my house, I need to know about it. We can work together to make sure the truth comes out." Tom's grip on the knife loosened slightly, and he seemed to respond to Marcus's direct approach. "Behind the furnace, there's a section of the wall that sounds hollow when you tap it. I broke through it one night when I was trying to expand my living space. That's when the smell got really bad." The older police officer spoke into his radio, calling for additional units and possibly the coroner's office. The situation was clearly more complex than a simple break-in or squatting case. "Sir, we're going to need you to put that weapon down so we can investigate your claims properly. If there's evidence of a serious crime here, we want to handle it by the book." Tom looked at Marcus with exhausted eyes. "I've been sleeping next to death for months, Marcus. Every night I could smell it, but I had nowhere else to go. Do you know what that does to a person who's already struggling with brain damage and PTSD? It was like living in a nightmare that never ended." Marcus felt a wave of compassion for his fellow Marine, mixed with horror at what Tom had endured while he was overseas receiving recognition and medals. "Tom, you're not alone anymore. We're going to get you help, and we're going to figure out what's in that basement together. But first you need to trust me and put the knife down." Slowly, Tom lowered his arm and placed the knife on the kitchen counter. The police officers immediately moved forward, but Marcus held up his hand. "Officers, this man is a wounded veteran who needs medical attention and support, not just arrest. He's given us information about a possible crime scene. Let's handle this with the respect he deserves." As one officer carefully secured Tom in handcuffs while speaking to him gently, the other officer began asking Marcus questions about the house's history and his relationship with Tom. Marcus explained about his deployment, Mrs. Patterson's observations, and his own discoveries since returning home. Within an hour, Marcus's quiet neighborhood was filled with police cars, a crime scene investigation unit, and a medical examiner's van. Tom had been taken to the hospital for evaluation, but not before giving a detailed statement about what he had found in the basement. The police had also interviewed Mrs. Patterson, who provided additional context about the strange activities she had observed. Detective Sarah Chen, the lead investigator, approached Marcus as he stood in his front yard watching the activity. "Mr. Rodriguez, we're going to need to thoroughly search your basement and possibly excavate sections of it. Based on what Mr. Hendricks told us in the preliminary investigation, we believe there may be human remains hidden behind that wall." Marcus looked across the street at Mrs. Patterson, who was watching from her window with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. His dogs were still in his truck, and he realized they had probably been sensing whatever was hidden in his basement all along. Their fear hadn't been about Tom. It had been about the death that was lurking beneath their home. "Detective, I need you to know that I bought this house from the estate of Harold Winters. He lived here alone for over 30 years before he died. I never met him personally, and I never thoroughly explored the basement. If there's something down there, I had no knowledge of it. Detective Chen nodded understandingly. We'll need to research Mr. Winters and the history of this property. In the meantime, you won't be able to stay here while we process the scene. Do you have somewhere else you can go for a few days? As Marcus made arrangements to stay at a nearby hotel with Rex and Luna, he couldn't stop thinking about Tom's words. A fellow Marine had been living in conditions no human should endure, while Marcus was overseas being called a hero. Meanwhile, both of them had been connected by a house that was hiding dark secrets that neither of them could have imagined. 3 days later, Marcus sat in Detective Chen's office learning the full truth about what had been hidden in his basement. The investigation had uncovered the remains of 3 missing persons who had disappeared over a 15-year period. Harold Winters, the previous owner, had been a methodical killer who had targeted vulnerable people that society was unlikely to miss: homeless veterans, runaway teenagers, and elderly people with no family. The forensic evidence suggests that Mr. Winters had been using his basement as both a killing ground and a burial site for decades, Detective Chen explained, sliding a thick file across her desk. The victims we've identified so far include a homeless veteran from 2008, a teenage runaway from 2012, and an elderly woman who was reported missing in 2015. We believe there may be more victims that we haven't found yet. Marcus stared at the photographs and police reports, feeling sick to his stomach. He had been sleeping above a mass grave for the 2 years he had lived in that house before his deployment. How did nobody know? How did he get away with this for so long? Winters was very careful about his victim selection, the detective continued. He chose people that wouldn't be immediately missed, and he was a respected member of the community. He volunteered at homeless shelters and elderly care facilities, which gave him access to vulnerable populations. Nobody suspected the helpful neighbor who brought meals to shut-ins and offered shelter to veterans down on their luck. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that Tom, a homeless veteran himself, had unknowingly been living in the tomb of someone just like him. What about Tom? How is he doing? Marcus asked, genuinely concerned about his fellow Marine's well-being. Detective Chen's expression softened. Mr. Hendricks is receiving treatment at the VA Medical Center. The combination of his brain injury, PTSD, and the trauma of living in those conditions for months created a perfect storm for his mental breakdown. But the good news is that he's responding well to treatment, and the VA has agreed to provide him with permanent housing assistance. Marcus felt a mixture of relief and guilt. While he had been serving overseas and receiving recognition for his heroism, Tom had been struggling with homelessness and mental illness, eventually ending up living above the remains of murder victims. I want to help him, Marcus said firmly. He's a fellow Marine and he deserves better than what he's been through. That's very generous of you, Mr. Rodriguez, especially considering what he put you through. The district attorney has decided not to press charges for the breaking and entering, given his mental state and the circumstances. His lawyer is working on getting him into a long-term treatment program that specializes in veteran rehabilitation. Over the following weeks, Marcus worked with victim advocacy groups and veteran support organizations to ensure that Tom received the help he needed. He also testified before a congressional committee about the gaps in veteran support services that had allowed a decorated Marine to fall through the cracks. So, completely. The house on Pine Street was demolished after the investigation concluded. The city determined that the property had been too contaminated by decades of criminal activity to be salvaged. Marcus used the insurance money and proceeds from selling the land to establish a foundation that provided emergency housing for homeless veterans. Mrs. Patterson, who had been deeply shaken by learning that she had lived across the street from a serial killer for years, decided to move in with her daughter in another state. Before she left, she gave Marcus a keychain that had belonged to her late husband, a World War II veteran. Heroes come in many forms, she told him. Sometimes the biggest heroism is helping someone who can't help themselves. 6 months after that terrible homecoming, Marcus visited Tom at the VA treatment facility, where he was making steady progress. Tom had gained weight, his mental clarity had improved significantly, and he was working with counselors to process both his combat trauma and the horror he had experienced in Marcus's basement. I'm sorry for everything I put you through, Tom said as they sat in the facility's garden. I wasn't thinking clearly. The brain injury, the homelessness, living in that place, it all just overwhelmed me. Marcus shook his head. Tom, you don't need to apologize to me.
If anything, I should be thanking you.
You helped expose a killer who might have continued claiming victims. And you showed me that real heroism isn't about medals or recognition. It's about taking care of the people who serve alongside you. Rex and Luna, who had gradually overcome their fear and trauma with the help of a professional animal therapist, were now certified therapy dogs. They visited the VA facility regularly, providing comfort to veterans struggling with PTSD and other mental health challenges. The dogs that had been so terrified by the evil hidden in their home had found a new purpose in healing others. As Marcus drove home to his new apartment that evening, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since that day he returned from deployment. He had expected to come home to a hero's welcome and a comfortable life, but instead he had discovered that true heroism meant recognizing when fellow veterans needed help and doing everything possible to ensure they received it. The foundation he had established was already housing 12 homeless veterans and had a waiting list of dozens more. Tom had become one of their first success stories, transitioning from the treatment facility to a supportive housing program where he was learning job skills and rebuilding his life. Marcus realized that his real mission hadn't ended when he returned from overseas. It had just begun. The war he was fighting now was against the systems that failed veterans like Tom, against the isolation and neglect that left brave men and women vulnerable to predators like Harold Winters. It was a different kind of battle, but one that was just as important as anything he had done in uniform. The anonymous text message he had received on his first day home turned out to have come from Tom during one of his paranoid episodes. But the words, "Some things are better left undisturbed," had proven prophetic in an unexpected way. By disturbing the secrets hidden in his basement, Marcus had not only solved multiple murders but had also discovered his true calling, ensuring that no veteran would ever have to face the kind of desperation that had driven Tom to live in a tomb rather than sleep on the streets.